Kia ora, this is Liz. Welcome to Dames Ablaze. If you have not watched the intro video yet, can I suggest you go do that now so you know what we're up to? Also, if you have not already subscribed, can you do that? And if you get to the end of the video and you think it's worthy of a like, can you throw me a like? That just helps me know that someone's out there watching. And also, if you feel like commenting, that would be awesome as well. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking into the ether. Just to remind us where we are, so last week the Pharisees said to the blind man that they didn't know where Jesus was from. And so this week we enter into the blind man's response to that. So we're reading this today from John chapter 9 verses 30 to 34. I'll read them to you now. The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvellous thing, that you do not know where he's from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it's been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." So he started his response with, "Why, this is a marvellous thing." Can you feel the sarcasm from here? I don't get the feeling that he's being honest with his amazement. I think he's ticked off, rightly so, and can't believe the rubbish they're laying down. A marvellous thing is something to be wondered at, an awe-inspiring sight even. He finds it marvellous that they don't know where Jesus comes from, seeing as he did this remarkable thing. Does he really find it marvellous? Or is he just subtly accepting the truth of their words, while at the same time completely disbelieving them? These are the teachers and preachers of the people, the elite studiers of the Word of God. They get to touch the scrolls, handle them daily. Their whole lives are dedicated to the knowledge of God, and yet they do not know where he is from, this remarkable man who opened his eyes. Was it not one of the signs of the Messiah? Why then do they not know where he's from? I think that in their heart of hearts they did know. They just didn't want it to be true. They didn't want the Messiah to look and act and speak like Jesus did. They wanted a king, someone trained in the ways of religion, someone like themselves. The man then proceeds to teach these learned men something. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears him. You could look at this and wonder, well then how can anyone be saved? If God does not listen to sinners, how does the prayer of repentance reach his ears? There is a motif in the Old Testament that God does not listen or hear the voice of sinners, but these are unrepentant sinners, those that are determined to go against God. He will not aid them in their cause or bring about the things they want unless it be to his glory in some fashion. What do I mean by that? I mean that if a sinner prays for another and that prayer falls within God's will for that other, he might step in and answer that prayer, but that doesn't mean he will automatically answer the prayers of sinners with a yes or even an acknowledgement. Why should he? If they don't even know who they're asking, if they have no relationship with him, why should he say yes to their prayers? Would you expect to rock up to a complete stranger, ask for their aid in some matter, and have it granted offhand, just like that? Wouldn't you expect to have some questions asked? Some further information required? Does God have to answer yes to every prayer sent to heaven, even from those who don't believe he exists? I think God has the perfect right to refuse the prayers of those who don't even believe in his existence. And yet, we know that often he does in fact answer those prayers, and in the doing of it has brought unrepentant sinners to their knees. As always, God knows better than we do. Shocking, I know. The man is not speaking in absolute here, but rather a principle. They have asserted that Jesus is not of God, and that they don't know where he gets his wisdom and power from. The man is merely reflecting what is obvious to everyone with eyes to see, that the things Jesus does and says, they're not possible if he wasn't from God. A true sinner would not be appointed by God to prophesy, right? They would not have the ability to perform the miracles Jesus performed, and they wouldn't want to. What use to a sinner would this man's sight be? Therefore, without actually coming out and saying it, the man is asserting that Jesus comes from God. He then goes on to add, if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears them. Second part of the belief then was that God would answer those who worshipped him and did his commands. A worshipper is someone who is God-fearing, someone who reverences God and the things of God. The word worship is so synonymous with singing in my head that it takes me a bit to realise we're not talking about singers here, but rather people who are dedicated heart and soul to God. Those people who love God, do his will, follow his commands, these people are by definition not sinners, and therefore are the ones that God listens to with a will to always say yes, if possible, and do stress the if possible. God is not a celestial Santa Claus. He doesn't have to say yes to everything you ask. So the man has countered their assertion that Jesus was a sinner with this little expose. Did you notice? He's laid out the major truths of the age. If God is answering the prayers of someone, it shines a light on that person's beliefs. They must be believers. They must be obedient, else God would not, could not, should not answer their prayers. The man then continues with his understanding of the world. He says, since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. Simple truths designed to derail even the most learned. Simple truths are all you need to know, you know. God's ways aren't really that surprising or curious. They work because they're obvious. If a man heals the eyes of a man born blind from birth, the simple truth of the matter must be that the man is a worshipper of the true God, because that was a remarkable thing. And it's still true, right? It's still a remarkable thing. The first operation done to produce sight in one blinded by cataracts only was performed in 1728. And ever since then, the ability of doctors to recover sight for some blind people has improved greatly. But they're still not really at the point of curing people who were born blind. They are toying with bionics and computer chips and whatnot. But for the centuries prior to this man, and centuries after, blind men who were born blind, well, they just didn't get to see. Which brings the man to the end of his lesson. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. There it is, folks, the simple truth that confounds the wise. It was such very much a marvellous, amazing thing that the Pharisees can be witnesses to this miracle of sight and yet still not see the truth. This blind man, who had lived at the bottom of society for his entire life, who'd never gone to seminary or even been within the confines of the temple, most likely, seeing as he wasn't pure, he knew a truth that was so solid no one could gainsay it. It was an obvious truth, and yet one that the Pharisees deliberately overlooked time and time again. If Jesus were not from God, he couldn't do the things that he did. It's an easy truth to hear, but for them, a very difficult one to swallow. It should have made them stop and think. It should have made them turn from their vainglorious arrogance and embrace their king, but unfortunately, it doesn't help matters much. The last thing they want to hear is the truth. Their ire and their rage bubble over, and they come up, frothing at the mouth, spouting rubbish, screaming, "You are completely born in sins." They are finally answering the question the disciples asked Jesus right back at the beginning of our chapter, when they first saw the man and they said, "Who sinned, Lord, this man or his parents?" The answer, according to these Jews, these Pharisees, was that it was him. Right? Somehow, some way, this man was a sinner from the moment of conception. Go figure. You were completely born in sins and you are teaching us. The audacity of the man, darling. How can he possibly hope to understand these technical legal matters of faith? Is just a beggar and know nothing. How dare he even think to teach us? Arrogance has this shield, doesn't it? It's held up anytime the clear truth is around. They don't want the truth. They can't handle the truth. They just want to shove it aside. They don't need this truth, right? They are disciples of Moses. And so they cast the truth out and they cast the man out and they figuratively wash their hands of the whole affair. Now, the scholars aren't sure whether the casting out here is the full excommunication from the temple or just a casting out from their presence. I suspect it wasn't the whole hog of excommunication, as I feel John would have mentioned that. And as many scholars pointed out, doing that required a decree from the Sanhedrin, so not just the Pharisees. But it doesn't really matter which it is, right? Whatever it is, they have still thrown truth out the window. Now, before Jesus healed this man, back in chapter 8, he had a conversation. Well, actually, it's better described as an argument, really. An argument with these Pharisees about whose children they were. I don't know if you remember it. It's a couple of lessons back. In the midst of that argument, he said this: "You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me." So that's John 8:44 and 45. How perfectly and quickly they have fulfilled his words. I wonder if any of them noticed. Prior to that argument, Jesus had spoken of being the light. That's John 8:12. Both of these thoughts collide in chapter 9, which is wholly dedicated to the blind man and comes just after this conversation, if we can call it that. He opens the eyes of the man born blind, right? Bringing light to that previously dark life, proving himself to be light. And he uncovers the desire of the Pharisees to wallow in lies and shun the truth. Truly they are children of their father. I think that's what Jesus is doing here, right? It's why he healed this blind man, to underline his teaching. The arrogance and pride of the Pharisees prevented them seeing the miracle for what it was, further proof of Jesus' identity, further proof that he was indeed the Messiah to come, and an object lesson to back up his teaching at the feast. Not, I suspect, for the benefit of the Pharisees, like Jesus knew how they thought, but rather for the rest of the people, those that had been listening at the banquet, those that had perhaps not quite understood his words, right? The promise of Isaiah echoes through this miracle. Isaiah says this in chapter 35, 4-6. "Say to those with anxious hearts, be strong, do not fear. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. With divine retribution he will come to save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue will shout for joy." God's glory had come to uplift, to heal, to open eyes, to shine amongst them. The light of the Lord was all around them, and yet there were those with eyes that refused to see. So caught up in their own understanding of how God should act, they missed the obvious signs of his coming. They missed the red flags all around them, and so they pushed away the only salvation that they would ever need. There is much to discover in this historical event, much that we have uncovered about witnessing. He's quite the evangelist, our man born blind, and I think gives us ideas on how to witness. Above all, stick to the truths you know. Don't go wading around in ideas that are above your pay grade. And don't be overawed by those who believe they have more understanding than you because of their credentials. Man's credentials mean nothing to God. He is the one who qualifies you to speak on his behalf. Even those preachers and teachers who've done years of training at seminary are nothing if God has not called them and equipped them to do their job. When I was in Borneo on a short mission trip many years back, we came across people who were training to be pastors. But they hadn't really been called. To them it was just a job. One of them wasn't even really interested in speaking about God. What good is that to the body of Christ, right? We need men and women with this man's kind of faith, this solid faith that's grounded on the rock of truth, not constantly being rocked by the winds of modernity. So we leave our blind man this week, cast out of the presence of the learned men. He will be met here, thrown once again to the margins of society, by the only one whose society is necessary. But for now, let's feel what he must have felt. He's told the truth. He was once blind, can now see. He has drawn out of them ire and rage, and they have discarded him as they would discard a piece of trash. He is once again thrown out of the temple. How does it feel to speak the truth and yet be rejected? We may have all experienced this at some time in our lives, or we may not. But try to feel how it feels to be put into this position where truth causes you more trouble, because I feel like we're in an age where this is in fact true. Maybe not in circles that you hang with, but for me, I spend a lot of time with young people. And I'm finding them very, very different nowadays from when I first started working with them. They're almost impossible to reach because they don't even seem to know how to listen anymore. Their responses are all wrong. They don't know how to empathize. They don't know how to ask questions. They only know how to complain about their own lives, and they don't want solutions to those troubles. They really just want to moan. What do you do with them? I speak truth to them, but it's like it bounces off again. I've struggled to know how to even talk to them, what to say, how to reach them. I'm praying hard, and I think I'll be praying for quite some time to come. We're about to head off for summer vacation, so I'm going to do some praying and some thinking over that break, so I'm better prepared next year. So pray for me, and pray for yourselves, that we would all have the words of God when we need them, like our blind man did. I hope there were people in the crowd that day who heard his words and took them to heart. I hope all that good stuff didn't fall on completely deaf ears. I hope that there were even some Pharisees who saw the truth and were set free from their own locked-in minds. As for our blind man, he doesn't appear to have made others see, but he can see now. So what does he do with that? We will find out next week. This week, consider what it's like to speak the truth and yet be rejected. That's all I have for you this week. I pray that you have an awesome week. Ka kite anō. We'll see you next time.